Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the 34th Annual Beachcombers Fun Fair. My name is Alan Raymer. I am the last founder of this event. There were 6 of us that put this event together in 1983, and previous to this event, I'd been involved with the Beachcombers Fair in Seaside, Oregon. Seaside, Oregon had a Beachcombers Fair that went from 1974 to 1981. I was the publicity chair for that event, and then when I came over to Washington, I thought it was time that this area has a Beachcombers Fair. So I had 6 people who were willing to assist me, and we did the Beachcombers. First one was in 1985. Thank you for doing that. The first Beachcombers Fair was 1985, and I chaired the first 5 Beachcomber fairs, and then my job changed, so I couldn't chair it anymore, but I've been involved with it since its founding. I was in my early 30s at the time. Everybody else was in their 50s or 60s, so I'm it now. And I'm originally from California, and I came to the University of Washington and got a job here on the coast. My first job was in Westport, and I worked for the Department of Fisheries at the time, working on razor clams. And then I started another job doing education. And my background is in elementary education, invertebrate zoology, and shellfish biology. And so I got to blend all those in the 80s. And for 22 years, I was the community environmental outreach specialist for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife on all marine issues except salmon. So if it was crab or clams or rockfish and cod and halibut, I was the spokesperson. And it was a really very rewarding career. What was one of the things that was really cool about the job was I learned how to use all the 4-letter words and how to put them in really cool sentences, because I was the messenger at most of the public meetings on those issues, and so people didn't like the fish and wildlife, so I learned how to use the F word and the S word and all kinds of combinations. And but I really enjoyed my job. What was really rewarding about it was I got to work with many different kinds of audiences, from school kids to sports clubs to senior groups, and it was always being mixed up, and I liked the mixing up that took place in this job. But one of my big jobs was to try to promote conservation and stewardship as it applies to razor clams. It's probably the biggest shellfish resource that we have in Washington State. And I keep saying we. I've been retired 13 years now, but I can't get out of we mode and us mode. So, but I like to share with people about the intricacies of this resource, because a lot of people are frustrated with the fact the seasons are really herky-jerky now, and there's a reason they're herky-jerky. And hopefully you'll understand that as a takeaway when we're all done here. And my job was basically to promote partnerships with the idea if the public understands why we have the rules and regulations we do, they're going to be more likely to comply rather than just do it. So if you can understand, you're going to be more likely to comply. So we're going to talk about life history first. You can't go anywhere until you understand the life history of the clam. And then we're going to talk about how seasons are set. And then we're going to talk about complications that have come up in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And then we're going to talk about violations and violators at the end. One of the things that was really interesting to me early in my career was that people would tell me at public meetings, if we get rid of the Oregonians, our problems will be solved, because everyone knows out-of-staters are big poachers. And so I thought that concept was very, very fascinating. So I started studying all the violations in 1980. And it was very fascinating what I learned, and I'll share that with you as we go along. So when we have questions, if you have questions, please go ahead and ask them. I don't mind if you take your mask off temporarily and put them back on, because we're distancing, but then put it back up. So we're going to concentrate on this board right now, and later on you can come up and take a look at it if you can't see it really well and you'd like to. We're going to start in the upper right-hand corner. This is a cross-section through the digger or the foot of the razor clam. And razor clams are separate sex. There's male clams and there's female clams. And a lot of people think, well, that's not a big deal. But in the ocean world, there's a lot of big deals going on. For instance, if you like to eat shrimp, shrimp never have female babies. There are only males born. And the people think, well, this is unusual. We know males don't have babies, so what goes on here? So when you're having cocktail shrimp or shrimp on your pizza or shrimp on a salad, you're eating the boys. And what happens is when they mature, a more robust, larger female means bigger eggs, bigger babies. So when you're having prawns or fried shrimp, you're eating the girls. And so the school kids always got a big kick out of this because they would quickly realize that something's going on here. And so usually the children would ask me, are the little boys mating with the big girls? I go, yes, that's what's going on. And they would ask which came first, the chicken or the egg concept. So you've got big girls having eggs, having little boys, and little boys becoming big girls when they're about 2 years old. So they transition when they're about 1.5 years. So the shrimp only spend about 1.5 years as males, then they become active females. So for those people who like to harvest shrimp in Puget Sound and Hood Canal, the law says you can only keep a shrimp when the head is 1 3/16 inches. And people think, what a horrible number. Well, that's the size at which they transition. So if you have calipers, that's 1 3/16, so you measure the head. We got to allow the males to escape to become active females, otherwise we're going to run out. So that's the reason with the shrimp. But clams are actual males and females. And you really can't tell until the springtime. And what you do is when that digger is getting fat, that's all reproductive material. So if you cut through the digger of a male clam when you open it to clean it, and it's smooth like sour cream, that's a male clam. If it's granular like wet sugar, that's a female clam. And those are all the ovocytes. Those are where the eggs are going to be produced. So on the left here we have a cross section through a female digger. On the right we have a cross section through a male digger. And they're broadcast spawners. They shed the eggs and the sperm into the water. It's interesting over my career when I travel around that there's certain words I wasn't allowed to use when I was at homeschool students, parochial school students, or certain audiences. And I'd go places and people would ask me, please don't use the S word. And so I'd say gametes, and they'd say that's good. So anyhow, it was like walking on eggshells depending on where I was going. So they shed the gametes, the sperm and eggs into the water, and it's called broadcast spawning. And so when the temperature is just right, they spawn. And this gray picture on the top here is 1 clam egg and 1/2 grain of sand. Later on you come take a look at it. So the eggs are in the water for about 48 hours. When they hatch, this next picture coming towards me is 1 baby clam, and it's only about the size of 1/2 grain of sand. They're very small and they're born shellless. They don't form a shell for the first couple days. They have a special organ in their body called the shell gland, and it starts pulling calcium out of the water. So this picture on the far top left is 2 baby clams and 1 grain of sand. So we're talking in terms of microns when they form their shell. Then they start sinking to the ocean floor. But as they're sinking to the ocean floor, they're like dandelion seeds in the wind. They're being traveling all over the place. So the spawning ground for razor clams was discovered in the late 80s, and it's up off an area called the Copalis Rocks. There's a submarine canyon there, and I was working on a special project in the late 80s where we were using underwater dragging devices, and there's a canyon there, and it's a nursery area. It looks like a giant daycare center. There's baby clams, there's baby fish, there's baby crab, baby shrimp in this area. It looks like a giant playground. And the baby clams settle into this canyon, and there's 2 species, a deep water species and a shallow water species. When October comes, the deep water babies know it's time to head west, and the shallow water babies know it's time to head east. How they do this, no one knows. They come up the sides of the walls of the canyon and they go in their respective directions. The deep water species only gets to be about 3 inches, and it's very, very squared off. And the crabbers will get them in their crab pots. But they know where to go. In October, the nursery area empties out. So when they come up on the beach, I had a little bottle of them, and I forgot to bring it with me. They're about the size of brown rice grains. And so, but they're still too small to hold on. So they're being transported in, out, north, and south. So the seeding area for the whole coast is up off the Copalis Rocks. And then they fan out, and they're carried north and south. The Navy has a submarine listening station at Pacific Beach, so we can't run our gear north of Pacific Beach. But we know from what goes on to the south that they come out like a plume, and they start moving onto the beach. Up until the time they're about 9 months old, they can't hold on. So they don't have the ability to use their digger and hold on. But when they hit 9 months, they have the ability to just hold on, stand their ground, and they don't move anymore. So as a digger, what happens is diggers have a tendency to move all over the beach when they're looking for clams. But what's very important to remember, I just had someone in a grocery store telling me this the other day down near Grayland, when you find a hole that you're happy with, don't continue moving towards the water. Move parallel to the beach. Because what's happening is, let's say you find a 5-inch clam. You're now in the zone of his kin. So you want to move that way, not going this way. What was really fascinating was in the late 90s, the big clams were up high. And so it was very fascinating working for the agency, because I would check clam diggers too. We're going to talk more about that later. Women normally do not like to get wet and be in the surf. So the men were in the surf getting the small clams, and the women were high on the beach getting big clams and back to their truck long before the men were even done. But what's happening was the women had this bounty going on for a few years with all the clams up high. So they were getting big mossbacks while the men were coming back with the wimpy clams from out in the water. So, because the men have this thing where they have to be in their chest waders out in the water.
Heck yeah.
And what's that?
Heck yeah.
Yeah, so it's a macho thing, yeah. So, but they mature very quickly. They reach spawning age at 2 years of age. So the 4-inch clams are only 2.5 years old. And they grow very slowly after that. There are 3 study sites on the coast where they monitor razor clam life history without the impacts of humans. So they're closed. There's one up near Ocean City, one at Twin Harbors, and one at Long Beach. And we watch what goes on there. And they get to be about 5.5, 6 inches, about 6 to 8 years, and they disappear. So the lifespan is not very long. So we know they're rotating through. So this is the life history of the clam. And so they have learned over the years that, like I said, the bigger clams are up and down, and they rotate through. So when people would tell us they remember the days where they came back like this, it just doesn't exist, because those zones are being watched and it's not happening. And one of the things I wanted to mention too, before I forget, is when they hit 9 months, they anchor in. That's where they stay. And so the clam has a specific orientation it needs to survive. The hinge is towards the ocean. They're angled towards the sand dunes. And the reason for this is when the wave comes in, by angling away from the water, it alleviates the forces of the pounding surf on it. It breaks it up versus being straight up and down. And they angle towards the sand dunes because when the water comes in, the big opening is up towards the sand dunes on the clam neck. The little opening is towards the ocean. When the water comes in, that big floret on top opens up to take in water and oxygen and food. When the water goes out, if you watch closely at the edge of the water on a sunny day, you see all these brown streamers coming out. They're pooping. They know it's time to poop when the water's pulling everything away from their mouth. When I take children to the beach, they're fascinated when I'll put one in purposely backwards, and the kids are very sharp. They'll say, "You're putting it in backwards, Mr. Raymer, it's going to poop in its mouth." And that's called fouling. Nothing survives that poops in its mouth.
Yeah.
So that's the reason we don't allow people to put them back. They don't know they have an angle. They don't know there's a front and a back, there's a top and a bottom, and they won't put them back in properly. So that's the reason the law says first 15 regardless of size or condition. And people have said, well, now that you've shared with us how to put them back properly, why can't I? They get air trapped in their system when they're pulled out. Let's say you're examining them, and then they lose their hydraulics. And when they go back in, they float to the surface, the crows and the seagulls get them. So look for the bigger shows. That's the reason you can't put them back in. And we're going to talk more about that with violations later on. So how do we know when to open the season? I'm just going to put this down for a moment. I'll hold it. So what we do during the clam season, in fact, I'm going to take this here, put this back. Use this as a shim. There we go. 4 times a year, the biologists will go out to the coast to do population surveys to figure out how many clams are in each area. So what they do is the coast is divided into 4 sections: Long Beach, Twin Harbors, Copalis Beach, Mock Rocks, and then there's a little area, Kalaloch here, but this has to be done in conjunction with the feds. So not too much goes on there. So these are the 4 primary areas. And what they do is they go out and they survey the clams. They know the clam range is about 600 feet from upper water down to minus water. And so what they do is, starting at Long Beach, there's a computer generated, so it's all random, and every half mile all the way up the coast, the computer will tell the biologists, sample 2 to the right, 3 to the left, 1 to the right, 5 to the left, so it's all random. So from the upper ranges of the beach to the lower ranges. So they create all these plots. And then they have this great big hydraulic system. It's, I want to say, it's 1/2 square meter. And what they do in each of those green circles is they liquefy the sand with a pump, and they take every clam out of that zone. So it includes even baby ones. In the old days, we would hand dig, and we would be out all night long digging along the coast. I don't know how many millions of clams I dug in my career. So this was relatively new. And so they liquefy the sand. It finds baby ones all the way to the giant ones. So they can figure out how many are in each of these circles through this 600 feet on the beach. 600. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 600. And they do this every half mile all the way up the coast. So when you hear someone say, Long Beach has X number of clams and they're all high, this area, Twin Harbors, they're all low, it's based on these assessments. So if you hear in the news that Long Beach has 1 million clams, 1 million clams, 2 million clams, 2 million clams, it's based on those numbers that are generated from this work on the beach. And so some years, what happens is, since the nursery area is up here, not enough get down to Long Beach to have a season. People feel like sometimes they're being discriminated against because we're allowing this area to open, but this area doesn't get to open. But the whole coast seems to be fed by this area up here, what happens. So if there's a lot of southerly currents, this area has lots of clams. And we're going to talk about other issues that have caused problems since then. So in the old days, up until about 1989, it was figure out how many number of clams are there. They allowed about 40% of the harvest to be harvested because they didn't know how many big adults they need to seed the beaches. So it was very conservative. They only allowed about 40% of clams over 4 inches to be harvested. It's changed since then, and I'm going to explain that later on too. So up through the 80s, they would do this work and find out how many clams it was, how many over 4 inches, open the season. Well, then in 1986, we were out checking diggers, and I remember it happened in this area, and the seagulls were pulling clams out of the sand. Nobody's around, but they're pulling clams out of the sand. So we know something's going on with the clams. So we, using these 3/4 ton pickups, we started chasing seagulls to get them to drop clams. And we got enough of them dropped, and they took them to there's a lab in Sequim, Washington for infectious marine diseases and parasites. So the clams were taken to Sequim, Battelle Labs Northwest, and they opened up the clams and they found inside of them was a new bacteria attacking the gill tissue of the clams. They were like clam pneumonia, they called it. So they were respiratory compromised. They were coming to the surface, and the crows and seagulls were eating them. So we lost almost 96, 98% of the clams in the fall of 1986. So then they started to rebound in 3 years. In 1989, they had some tentative seasons, and then things took a nosedive again. So what happened in about 1990, and you may have, so anyhow, this disease was called NICS, nuclear inclusion unknown. It scared people to death. They did not realize the center of a cell was called the nucleus. So it was nuclear inclusion unknown. People thought radiation, and they were scared to death. But this disease did not have a name at the beginning. And it was wiping out the clams, not in oysters, not in mussels, not in other bivalves. They didn't know why. So we lost the clams. They started to rebound. In early 1990, the summer of 1990, there was an incident off the California coast where the pelicans and the sea lions were acting goofy and dying, and they didn't know what was going on. At the same time, on Prince Edward Island in Canada, they had an incident during the same time, August, September of 90. People went to a seafood restaurant, a very popular seafood restaurant in Prince Edward Island. 206 people, I mean, the names, everything is still just like a Rolodex in my mind. And when the evening was over at this restaurant, 6 of them were dead, 6 people were permanently institutionalized, and the other 12 from 100 to 206 were in the hospital. And they found what was called domoic acid. It's called amnesic shellfish poisoning. And this red tide has always been known around here, but this red tide is PSP, paralytic shellfish poisoning, which is a respiratory compromising. This is a mental a brain thing, amnesic shellfish poisoning. And what happened was the 6 people who died had a big hit of this toxin, and it fried their brain, and they were killed. But the people who were permanently institutionalized had a big hit. It's funneled to the right, left lobe of your brain when you get this. So when you get a mild hit, it fries the front right lobe of your brain, which is where new learning takes place. And you learn new things, and it's transferred to the rest of your brain. But when you get this big enough hit to live, it fries this and you survive, but you'll never learn anything new again. And I watched a film. They took a gentleman who was a physics professor at the University of Montreal, University of Toronto, very, very dignified older gentleman. And just to show of how bad this is, they took him and they asked him physics questions, and he could answer. But they then took him into a grocery store, and they took him to the back of the grocery store and asked him to walk to the front. I didn't know this before, but when you go into a new department store, a new grocery store, you're subconsciously making a route in your mind. You're making a new pathway in your mind of how to navigate the aisles of a clothing store or department store. They got the man to the back of the store and asked him to walk to the cash register, and he started crying. He couldn't get to the front of the store. And then they took some pictures of him later on. They showed him pictures of his daughter's wedding. And he said, no, she's not married yet. And he says, there you are. There's your son-in-law. There's the wedding party. And he says, no, she's not married. And she was there, and she says, Dad, I'm married now. He says, no, you're not. It was very sad to watch. So people early on, so this happened in 1990. And then we had an incident in South Bend and Raymond, Washington, on the Central Coast. Long Beach was open that year. We had to close it suddenly. And they sampled the clams from South Bend and Raymond residents. They were very high in domoic acid. It's 4 times more potent than red tide. So what they did, this is back in the day, there's different ways of testing for it now. They would grind up the razor clams, inject the serum and the razor clams into mice. And it's called mouse units. And they would watch how the mice reacted to the serum from the razor clams. It was very horrifying to watch. But when I was trying to explain this to people at public meetings, where I learned a lot of my new 4-letter word combinations, they told me I was just trying to deprive them of the right to dig razor clams. So I went to the state attorney general, and I asked on my own, is there any way we can tell people they're hot, but let them sign waivers and determine for themselves if they want to die or not? So I learned at that time that you cannot sign away your right to litigate. So the agency had to make a decision in conjunction with the health department to put up with this. So people would tell me, you just want the whole beach to yourself. And I would ask them, why do I need the 28-mile Long Beach Peninsula for me and my family? That's ludicrous. And then I decided to take a new route with this. So when I started doing more, it got really nasty in the 90s. I would tell people, I had big audience, especially in Long Beach, we can have a clam dig, but we have to kill someone in the room tonight. Who volunteers to be killed tonight? Come forward so we can kill them, and then we'll go. I never had a hand go up. So it got real quiet when I said we have to kill somebody tonight. Who wants to volunteer? So this toxin got really bad. It got really high, and they found that it responds to nutrient loads in the water. It's a plankton. It likes nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And people don't realize off our coast, we have a nearshore current. It moves south in the fall and the winter, and it shifts and goes north in the spring and the summer. there's a huge nutrient load off the mouth of the Straits of Juan de Fuca. It brings everything out of Puget Sound to the south off our coast. So this is when the toxin was going the highest. It drops in the spring, so now it's being carried to Canada. It's been really hard to understand this nutrient issue, but it's real. So now you read in the paper, you hear it on the radio, I believe it's 20 parts per million is where they have to cut it off. And that's the level at which the most seriously compromised humans are going to be affected. It probably won't affect the majority of us, but we have to think about immune-compromised people. So that's where they cut it off. Same applies to the tribal. It's all tribal regulations too. So they watch this and they try to, even though there's big clams, as the Life History Board showed, we can't get to them if they've got this toxin in their body. So again, it was all conspiracy to keep them away. And so we had that issue. We had red tide, we have domoic acid or amnesic acid. Some people call it demonic acid because of what it does to your brain, and I think that's a good term for it too. Then in the late 90s, the Native Americans challenged the Judge Bolt decision on just salmon. They wanted the right to go after, they said it applied to shellfish too. And the federal courts mandated that in their historical harvesting and hunting areas, they had a right to 50% of the clams. The treaty area is the mouth of the Grays Harbor, right back here, up the coast. Doesn't apply to Twin Harbors, doesn't apply to Long Beach. But this area here has to be 50%. So it's co-managed now with the Quinault Indians. When they find there's harvestable clams, adequate numbers, they take the number, I'll just use 100, 50 are laid aside for them, 50 are laid aside for non-tribal people. So, but in fairness to the tribes, there's been many cases, they know they can't get their 50% of X million of clams, and they love their casino. So what they'll do is they'll donate them back to the Fish and Wildlife, knowing it's bringing people to the North Beaches here, and the spinoff is going to be us. So they're very graciously realizing the dollars and cents applies to them too. So there'll be times when you'll go to the beaches here and you'll think, look at all the people out there. I didn't hear anything on the radio. I didn't see anything in the newspaper. It's the it's the native people digging. Because as non-native people, we can get our 1 million share much faster than several hundred native people can get their share. The registered diggers are very small up on the North Beaches. So this is co-managed. So now you have the issue of domoic acid, you have tribal, federally mandated rights to dig clams. So you've got all these issues besides population studies at play here. So how do you know when they allocate so many clams to be dug, how many get harvested? And that's really fascinating in itself. So I'm just going to leave this here and then bring this one to the front. So they have public meetings to determine when a season's going to happen. So when we have, let's say, 1 million clams for us here on the Ocean Shores area, they have 1 million clams to harvest. They work with the business owners as well as the public to allocate that out, to make it spread as far as possible so you get the biggest bang for the buck. They used to push them all together. Business owners don't like that. They like it spread out over multiple weekends, multiple holidays. So they take that 1 million clams and they spread it out. And that people will say, well, it doesn't work with my vacation plans or my time off. We can't, people will tell me, I don't like to take my vacation in the spring. I want it in the winter. And I said, we can't work with individuals on managing a razor clam season. So we pick the best times of the year for the general population. I've had so many people tell me, I can't get off in April. Why don't you do it in May? I said, we can't send letters to every individual saying, when are you taking vacation this year? So they do it the best they can. So when the seasons are underway, the biologists will go out and they work these sections of beaches. Each of these sections will have people. And what they'll do is in a truck, we'll drive. There's usually 2 people per vehicle. We drive from the mouth, I'm just going to use this beach as an example. We drive from the mouth of the Grays Harbor all the way up to the Copalis River. one person's driving and one person's counting every individual on the beach. We usually start an hour and a half before low water. We have found that's when the max 60% of the people are usually on the beach an hour and a half. They've done what's called ingress-egress studies, where we're on the beach for 6 hours. Every beach approach has a person counting every car on and off the beach. So we know that an hour and a half before low water, 60% of the people are going to be on the beach. That's an important number, remember, 60%. Then we drive down the beach while one person's making sure not to hit anybody coming and going. Another person just clicks the little heart out for all that whole, no one likes Copalis because it's like 12 miles of clicking. So then you record those numbers. And then we turn around at the other end and we try to stop 20% of everybody coming off the beach and counting their clams. So so I'll be driving and I'll be counting everybody here. And it's fun when they're all mishing and mashing out and everything here. So you click and your eyes are all rummy when you're done. Then you turn around, and then the person who's driving is also counting everybody who's sitting in the vehicles. So they're watching not to hit the dogs and small children and counting people sitting in cars. And I count everybody down below. And then we tabulate that as we're going along. So it's very, very stressful, that part. Then we come back, we interview people. We'll ask you, how many were in your group? How many were digging? How did you do? So I'll say 4 people. And a couple with a baby and a school-age toddler. And so those people are basically allowed, I'll say the baby because that's important to later on, will have 45 clams. And so we'll measure some of them to find out how big they are. That gives us an idea of what's happening along the coast. And we'll measure those. And where you have problems is they come up, and there's 4 of them, and they have 4 limits. There's a little baby all swaddled in a carry thing. And what the officer will do will give you a chance to demonstrate that child swaddled in a cloth can dig. Otherwise, you get a ticket for digging another person's limit. Just because there's 4 of you doesn't mean you're entitled to 60 clams. And but they like to see messy children because that means they were participating. They may not know how to use the shovel or the tube, but participating and learning is the way to get them started. And that's going to come into later on. So they count all the clams, they measure all the clams to see the size ranges. And so this is when we get to figure out who has limits and stuff, and I'll tell you some really wild stories a little later. So we get asked, and it's really fun to see someone coming up with just this huge bulging sack, and you know the whole day is shot now. So, because you got a major violation. So that's how we figure out how big they are, where they're at, is by doing these actual interviews. At nighttime, we count lanterns. So that's all we count is the glow of flashlights and lanterns. And by stopping people when they're coming up, we know there's 2.8 people per lantern or flashing light. So that's the way we can extrapolate how many clams were harvested. So we'll stop these lantern people, ask to look at their clams, measure them, and then we know for the whole length of beach, 60%, extrapolated out how many people were on the beach for nighttime digging. One thing that's interesting here I want to share with you at this point before I forget with you, just some of the things we have to contend with. When we do what's called ingress-egress, where you're trying to figure out how many people are on the beach an hour and a half before low water. I had an incident in Ocean City a few years ago where a couple was coming off the beach. It was a nighttime dig. And she was telling me she really hates nighttime digging. It's cold, it's wet, you can't see the waves. And she says, why don't you allow us to dig during daylight hours? And I said, the tides in the spring and the summer are in the morning hours. Evening and fall is nighttime, the best digs. And she leaned out the window to me and she said, change it. And I prayed that she didn't have children. They didn't pass those genes along. But I pointed up above and I said, you need to talk to a higher authority to change it. Just minutes later, a man came down the beach. And the tide had flipped. And he was late. He'd come from Olympia. And he said, I know the tide has changed. Can I stay a little longer? Can you write a note so an officer won't give me a ticket? And I thought, I hope you don't get married and have children. So, but these are kinds of things that people don't realize with how the tides work and the stars and the moon, the line, and all this kind of stuff. So the next thing I want to share with you is when you're digging clams, there's some interesting things that happen on the beach when you're down there. People will see all this mucky brown stuff on the beach. And they'll say, where did all the sewage sludge come from? And people don't realize that brown mucky stuff is the diatom that they feed on. And in reality, the muckier the beach is, the bigger and fatter the clams are going to be. So when you get people to realize there's a little diatom that makes this muck, they want more muck on the beach. Now, yes, it doesn't look good when it's in your vehicles. It stinks to high heaven and stuff. But the animal itself is long chains, like little boxes, little glass boxes, and they form long chains. There are other kinds of diatoms, but the one this guy likes, little brown boxes, little spicules on the end. And they link up to form big chains. When the surf is rough, the little green animal gets smashed and mixed with silt. And that's how you get that whippy, that sludgy looking brownish green stuff. That's the little animal's beaten up bodies. But that meat translates into big clams. Another thing that people will see on the beach is clam shells, crab shells in the spring. And they'll go, the crabs are dying, do something. And they don't realize, most people, that they have to shed their shells in order to grow. And so female crabs molt in the spring, males molt in the summer. So what happens with the crab fishery, for those of you who are paying attention here, is the only time the female can mate is when she's shed her shell. The oviducts are only open for 72 hours. So she comes out of her shell. The male crabs will follow them into shallow water, waiting for this opportunity. In the wintertime, they all stay in deep water. But if you watch in December, you can barely see the crab boat lights on the horizon. But right now, they're just offshore. What's happened, the males have followed the females into shallow water. They're waiting for the water to warm so the females to molt. So they'll molt, and then they move offshore. The males stay in shallow water, and they usually molt in August and September. So for crabbers, it's ideal. It's shallow water, nicer weather. So that's what's going on when you see the crab boats out deep and they come in shallow. So the only time that oviduct is open is during that period of time. There's no children here, so I can share another fact with you. For those of you who like to eat crab, when you buy crab, we as consumers like clean, shiny products. When you buy crab in the store, you want the dirtiest, filthiest shell you can get. Barnacles, moss, and algae means it's lived in there for a long time. So it's a nice, firm crab full of meat. When they shed their shells, they have a clean, shiny shell. And we as consumers like clean, shiny products. So, but what's happened is they've molted, so they have more room to grow. So you have half water and half mushy meat. So when you go to the store, Pike's Place Market, it's interesting, you look at the faces on people in grocery stores. If they're in a plastic container, I'll push on the shell. If I see barnacles or algae, I know it's good. But if I can't see barnacles or algae, usually in December, I push right behind that biggest spine. If it's pliable like a little baby's skull, I leave it alone. So you want a shell. That's the last part to harden off on the Dungeness crab. It's right behind that big spine. So I'll pry, and they'll say, no, you can't do that. And I'll go, well, I want one that's full of meat, not mushy water. So, but when you cleaning a crab, the high school boys just love this. When you back a crab and you pull the belly flap up, the four prongs, why we don't know. The boys have four penises. So the high school boys all want to grow up to be a crab when they're adults. So when I tell the high school kids that. So and the female only has two oviducts, so we've never figured out why there's four peni on the male crab. But that's what you're looking at, two majors and two minors. So anyhow, it's just kind of a fun fact. So the other thing people will see on the beach in the late winter and early spring is the little blue jellyfish. And the Valhalla are sailors by the wind. And they're a harbinger of good beachcombers, and this is the Beachcomber Fair. So in the wintertime, the nearshore current gets impinged up against the coast. So when the Japanese Kuroshio current comes over here, it really pushes up against our coast in the wintertime. And when you get westerly winds, everything that's in that current breaks away. And based on its buoyancy, the lightweight stuff comes first. So on our beaches, we usually get plastic water bottles, plastic wrappers, containers coming in. If they have stuff growing on them, barnacles, the gooseneck barnacles, that's even a better harbinger of beachcombing. So when these things start to come in on the beach, we'll start seeing glass floats and light bulbs and bottles. Logs usually come last, logs and rolling pins, because they ride low in the water. So usually you pay attention to this stuff. There is a progression of how all the stuff comes up on the beach. So for beachcombing, you want to watch for this kind of stuff. People always told me it's Portuguese man of war. It's really fascinating. I've lived here now 51 years temporarily. I came here just to take a teaching job. I hated it here because of the weather. So I always tell people I'm here still 51 years temporarily. So, but I'll go on the beach and I'll wade into the jellyfish. And people will come by in their cars and say, you know, you're going to die. You're going to get stung to death. And I'll hold up a glass ball. And they go, oh, really? That's in there? Park the cars and they just jump right in. I remember down at Grayland one time, a bunch of horseback riders riding by me and go, you know, you're going to die. And I had 3 or 4 glass floats with me. I've never seen people dismount from horses so fast and climb into the Valhalla with me and pick up glass floats. So that's how they figure out how many clams are there. Well, then we get into the issue of violations. And it's very, very fascinating now that I've gone through all these tickets since 1980, with the idea initially that it is the Oregonians who are causing the problem. So I broke the tickets down into in-state, out-of-state, and then we did age classes. And it turned out in 80, 84, and 88 that the biggest violators were Pacific County, Grace Harbor County residents, male between 65 and 75. They made up the biggest part of the violations. And we looked at that for a moment. We thought, wow, it's right in your face. And it made sense because later on, I brought just a few. And please don't take it if it's going to go in the garbage. A lot of stuff I used to give out used to end up in the garbage can. In the early years, there were no limits. And then it was 36, and then 24, and then 18, and 15. The older men grew up here. Razor clams were like motherhood, apple pie, baseball, and Chevrolet. It was my right as a native of the coast to have as many as I wanted, so they resented it. Well, then in the early 90s, it changed. The worst violators were men, Grace Harbor, Pacific County, between 55 and 65. And the older group was gone, and it made sense. The men had taught their sons, the older men had moved to clam beds in the sky, and the younger men are now doing this. Well, then in the late 90s, gas prices started to change. Historically, people from the I-5 corridor were very good. Oregonians are the best diggers ever. They make up about 19% of the digging group, but like 1% to 2% of infractions. They're very, very good. They like coming here and paying the out-of-state fee, knowing they're going to have a quality resource. I got lots of compliments from people out of state. So, but it changed. And when we realized that it's now changed, we linked it to gasoline prices going up. People are coming here, we're going to go for it. Because on a really good day, there'll probably be 7 cops on the whole beach. So your chances are really good of getting away with it. Well then, as we started in the early 2000s, it changed again, and it was really dramatic because where it was adults before, it was now children over the infractions. And I'll share a little bit of that with you. So the whole family was coming, and the whole family was now poaching. And so when I did the tickets, I did it from 0 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30 on up. And as the years went by, it was pushing down into younger people. And when I'd ask people, I'd stop someone with an infraction, I would ask them, your children have 20, each of them have 20. And they would say, the gas is going up, we're going to take a chance and wing it because we came from so far. The thing that was really bad in these cases, especially with teenage children, when you have the equivalent of a couple over the limit, it's not a big deal. But when you have like double limit on you, it's now a gross misdemeanor. And young people, when they're applying for jobs, have to check the box, yes, I'm a convict. So it's going to follow them for 3 years when you have a gross misdemeanor. I believe that was then. I don't know. I've been gone 13 years. And so I had one case of a family from Olympia. They had 3 teenagers between 16 and 19. They had on their possession, each one of them had between 38 and 54 clams. And this was up near Ocean City. And so I told them, you're over the limit, all of you. They look like out of Gentleman's Quarterly magazine. They all look like models, the whole family. I don't know how they got that many with looking so beautiful, no sand on them. But he said, we lost track because it was such a nice day. I said, how do you lose track from 15 between 38 and 54 clams? So I could detain people back then, couldn't give a ticket. So I said, what's unfortunate now is each of your teens can look for summer work, but they have to report themselves now as they have violations. So anyhow, so we had that, and then I'll tell you my favorite story at the end. So anyhow, in 2004 was the last time I went through the tickets. In Grays Harbor County alone, $37,400 was posted in bail through the courthouse in Grays Harbor County. The average ticket was for 16 over. So when you have the equivalent of an extra limit on you, it's a mandatory appearance in court now. It's a $750 fine, and you have to appear in court. So I thought I would go to court. They had special days to run hunting and fishing infractions through the system, to listen to what people's stories were about why they had so many clams. And the underlying reasons on all of them was we lost track, which I have a hard time with, and we were having so much fun, we decided to go for it. But when you're trying to teach conservation and stewardship, I would tell people, we can't continue that if we hope to have a future for children and grandchildren. Can't do that. I watched a man one day at Pacific Beach come on and off the beach in a yellow Volkswagen, and the only thing that was different about him is he had on a different baseball cap. And he kept coming by me, and I realized after a while his baseball cap is different. So I got an officer to follow him, and somewhere on the Ocean Beach Road they followed him. He was digging a limit and storing it in the woods. Coming back, he would change his cap, but the yellow Volkswagen gave him away. He had 7 or 8 limits up in the woods. And but probably my 2 favorite stories, this is back in the time. Back in the old days, it was $10 for each clam, starting at 16 over. Starting at 31, it was 19. So just keep that in mind when I tell you this story. I watched a couple down at Washaway Beach down near Tokeland, and I could see they had chest waders on, and they had clams hanging off their chest waders. But they were digging and coming together and separating, digging and coming together. And so I just waited for them to come up. And I noticed as they came up the beach, their legs were way apart. They waddled like a child carrying a bowel movement in their pants. And anyhow, they came up. I said, hello, you have your clams, and they showed me their 15. And I said, is this your truck? They said, yes. And I said, I want to watch you get into the cab. So I said, you're walking kind of funny. And he goes, yes, we're older. And I said, I'd like to watch you get into the cab. Is this your truck? Yes. Are you going to go home with your hip waders on, chest waders? Yes. I said, I'd like to watch you get into the cab of the truck. And they looked at each other. They go, well, we got a few extras in the boots. So they took off their boots, and between them, they had 435 clams in the chest waders. So when they were coming together, they were filling each other's boots. And the officer came, and I didn't know at the time, they were 80 and 81 years old. And I complimented them for being so. They were using shovels. I said, 1, I hope I'm alive at your age. 2, I hope I can be as agile as you are. But if you have children and grandchildren, which they said they did, this is a hell of a thing to be leaving a legacy to your children. Their ticket was just about between $5,000 and $6,000. And anyhow, the other one was up at Moclips. I watched an elderly gentleman with 3 little girls, and they were patting a hole down, and they were just grooming this hole really well. We go down the beach and we check wastage. So when the dig is over, we'll walk down along here, and we have a clicker in our hand and a shovel, and we'll look to see how many are left behind. If it's over, we'll usually check holes in increments of 100. So I'll do like 200 holes, zigzag along here. If it's over 8% of the holes have smashed clams in them, it's an emergency closure, and that's they know everyone digging a limit digs about 22 holes to get their limit. So by knowing how many people on the beach, extrapolate out, the wasted clams come off your next season. So the days can be shortened based on how many clams you leave behind. But this man was patting down a hole. I was down using my clicker. I went up and identified myself. I uncovered the hole. There were 23 smashed clams in the hole. I'll never forget this day. So he told me it wasn't his hole. And I said, I've been watching you with the 3 little girls. I didn't know they were his granddaughters at the time. So we went back and forth, and he says, we got 15 in the bag. And I said, but you've been smoothing out the hole for a while. I've been watching you. So I'm assuming you sorted it between yours and the girls. Finally, the youngest girl, about 10, 11 years old, said, Grandpa, why are you telling him no? This isn't ours. We do this every time we come down. She didn't understand what was going on. So the officer came. They got a ticket for $76 times 23. I felt that was really good for the girls to see, that you can't, this is not normal activity. So, and I had another incident one time with a woman and 2 teenage girls chucking them at the water line. And I saw them pitching. And I told her you couldn't do that. And she said, we can do what we want, we pay our taxes. And then with the 3 teenage girls, she told me to F off. So I called for an officer, a backup, and she was cited for wasting clams. I'm pretty flexible until you tell me things like that. But if we want to have these resources, it's going to take all of us pitching in together. You can come down multiple days and dig and stuff, but it's pretty mind-boggling, the ramifications of how much is going off, potentially going off illegally. So the idea is to partner and work on this together, because it ultimately belongs to you. All the agency's trying to do with the 6 or 7 guys is manage it for your well-being so you can dig in the future again. So that was my job, working for Fish and Wildlife for 36 years. I only did it the last 22 years. It's really interesting. I have to share this on a closing note, and I'll take questions. My parents didn't want me to go into this line of work. It's not a moneyed profession, education and working for Fish and Wildlife. And but I wanted job satisfaction. I knew early in my life I wanted to do something working with people, especially working with children. There's nothing like taking children to the beach and getting them all jazzed about the beach. And kids especially love to learn how sand dollars go potty. And but it's just to see the sense of wonder in them. But my parents both died before it happened. But 2012, I was the Science Teacher of the Year for the United States. I was only the 3rd Washingtonian that's ever been named Science Teacher of the United States. And right about the same time, there was a book that came out called The Highest Tide by Jim Lynch. And it's a book about a little boy who looks at the ocean and can predict what's going to happen to humans. And everyone thinks Miles is nuts until the end of the book. And he has a mentor in the book, and it's a professor from Evergreen College. Well, Jim Lynch wrote the book. He shadowed me on the job for a year, and most of the events in the book happened to me in real life with school children. And it was like a year or 2 later, he acknowledged that the professor in the book was me. Well, my friend Wendy, who's with me at the Beachcombers Fair out here, said it was going to become a Hollywood film. Michelle Pfeiffer's first husband purchased movie rights to it. I met the film crew. I got to read the screenplay for scientific accuracy. They've cast the characters for the film. And she asked me, when the film comes out, if it becomes an Academy Award nominee, can I walk the red carpet with you? I have my dress picked out and everything. And I said, yes, I'll take you on the red carpet if that comes. But my parents didn't want me to go into this line of profession, and I wish, because of the award in this book, that they were alive to see this. High school kids would always ask me, when I do career fairs, how much did you make? And I would tell them, after 36 years, I topped out at $43,900. And their eyes just roll back in their heads. But I can tell them every day was Friday for me. I loved going to work. I worked with different audiences in different settings every day of the week. I never had Mondays. And my siblings make a lot more money than me, but they're horrible, they're miserable human beings. And I loved what I did. And some of you weren't here, but I've got nephews and nieces that make in a month what I make in a year. And they're very good to me, but I loved my work. I also have to share with you, it's really interesting. I wanted to run for politics in the 80s. I wanted to get involved for the environment and politics. And I went through a group that trains you how to run for elective office. And they asked me to tell them something about myself I didn't like and how I would change it. 3 women and 4 men interviewed me. And I said, I don't like my height and I don't like my weight, but I've learned to accept that this is the body God gave me, and I'm just going to do the best I can with it. Later on, I learned that was the answer they were looking for. And then they asked me, tell them something about my job I didn't like, and how I would change it. I said, every day's Friday, there's nothing I would change, and they were happy with that. They didn't pick me, and following year, they invited me back to interview, and I interviewed again, and one of the men said to me, I'll never forget this has been with me since 1988, you have principles, you have values. You're going to have to be willing to give those up if you're going to get an elective office. Are you willing to do that? And I said, absolutely not. And so I held my head high and I walked out of the room that day. He says, you're going to get eaten alive. And so and now I see what's going on in the world, and I think back to 1988, and I thought, wow, those people were right on back that time frame. So I love what I'm doing. This is the first event I've been to since March of 2020. We were the last event in the conference center in March of 2020. COVID hit on Tuesday. And so this is my first time back in here since 2020. I'm a people person, and I'm tired of Zoom. I'm really, really sick and tired of Zoom meetings. So it's just really nice. Thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, I'll answer them for you. Otherwise, I'll put this stuff out. You can come and take a closer look at this. And if you'd like one of the sheets here, just promise me it's not going to go in the garbage. It's got a lot of information on how the seasons transpired over the years since 1929.
Okay, my name's John Anderson. I have John's Beachcomb Museum in Forks. And my talk is on extreme beachcombing. Because down here you drive the beaches, walk flat sandy beaches. Up there it's mile and a half, 2 miles of rugged trail into remote beaches and pack everything out on your back. So anyways, some of the things you want to know up there is you want to be prepared for rain, for injury, anything like that. So you know where you're going, where you're going to be coming out. I always had a hiking stick with me. I've got a trekking pole now. But anyway, this is me. This is what most people are looking for. It's considered the holy grail of beachcombing is finding a glass float. They're more and more rare now. They quit making them and using them in the early 60s. So they're still out there floating around. They still come in when the winds decide to. So, hey, Jack. So this is Amos Wood. This is a good friend of mine. He was the first author of Beachcombing, a book. And he was all over, beachcombing all over, and connected with all the beachcombers back in the day. And it's a really good book. If you get a hold of it, it just tells you all about beachcombing from A to Z. So it's a good book to have. He was a good man. Passed away with a really nice collection of glass floats, and his family, they went all over the place. Good, Jack. So one of the first things about beachcombing is family. Get your family involved. This is my two boys, Patrick and Stephen, when they were little. And we just hit the beach at Hoe Head, and one of them's already got a buoy there. So you start them out young. Hey, Jack. And so this is the two boys with their two cousins down at the beach. Best place for kids at the beach. They can't get into trouble. They can't break nothing. Hey, Jack. That's my daughter-in-law, our granddaughter. This is a few years ago. She's going to turn 6 next week. Okay. This is me and my son Patrick, my wife Debbie, and my granddaughter, or my daughter-in-law. That's Elephant Rock in the background, and that at the mouth of the Raft River. And the nose on Elephant Rock there is there no more. That all slid off 2 years ago. Okay, Jack. So you want to always get pictures at the beach of things like that because it might not be there again. This is another trip with a couple friends down to Second Beach, La Push, and this was a string of plastic buoys that we packed out. This is my buddy Kenny. He's been to the Beachcombers Fair with me. He can't make it this year. He's taking care of his in-laws. So, Jack. So this is Jack and me, Shy Beach. This is some of the stuff we got that day. Okay. And this is a nice picture of the beach. You just don't really see the colors and stuff, and it's like after a storm you can see all the seaweed, and It's just a bright day.
Is it still at Treasure?
No, this is Norwegian Memorial. Okay. This is at Norwegian Memorial. So this is summertime when the algae on the rocks, it's usually kind of brown and all that, but in the springtime, in the early summer, it all starts growing back real green. And it's really slippery. Be careful. Okay, Jack? And this is Hawaii. We got some really good beachcomber beaches there, but all this is just really sharp lava rock. I got scrapes and scars on my legs you wouldn't believe from falling on them rocks. Okay. This is Kurt Ebbasmeyer. He's missed this year, so he does the Beachcombers Alert newsletter. He couldn't make it this year, but this is in Matagorda Island in Texas. He's being framed here. Told us we beachcomb there. Okay, Jack? This is what you beachcomb for down there, sea beans, tropical drift seeds from the Amazon that float up onto the Gulf Coast. Okay, Jack? This is a sunset from my ocean property. Yeah, there are lots of sunsets to be had. Now this is one other picture I was telling you about. You want to take a picture of things, because this kind of looks like an old timer or a lady with a shawl with a hat on. The top of that's not on there anymore. So, okay. And then you always see critters on the beach, a lot of deer. Of course, down here in Ocean Shores, they're big pests, but you'll see deer all the time, especially in the springtime. Okay. It's a dead sperm whale. You'll see dead whales. We get anywhere from 3 to 5 a year on the coast up and down here. That's the first sperm whale I've seen dead on the beach. Okay, Jack. And the foam, you get really good storms and really deep foam on the beach. That foam is actually beat up living organisms. You walk through that and you go home and you take your pants off that had that on it, you throw them in the corner and you're going to get in trouble by mom or your wife, because that stuff really stinks. It doesn't take very long. Okay. And this is up by Shy. This is the prop off of a USS Meigs, General Meigs boat that was being towed to be scrapped, and it washed ashore in a storm. And that's just the prop of it sticking up out there in the water. Okay. Pacific white-sided dolphin, dead on the beach. I mean, you see all kinds of marine critters. Go ahead. Rainbow, double rainbow. Okay. Another sunset. Okay. And there's Elephant Rock in all its glory. Nose is gone off it now. Okay. Always be on the lookout. Check all your bottles. If you're not packing it off for trash, got a message in the bottle right there. I have a 3-ring binder this thick full of messages in bottles I found over the years at my museum. Okay. Tsunami boat. I found 4 of these on the beach, and I turned them into Fish and Wildlife because I wanted to check the invasive species on them. And I told them, I said, I'd like to have the boat for my museum when you're done. And they went and cut the boat in pieces. So the 4th one I didn't tell them about. I just brought home. So it's in my yard. Okay. This is it when it's tipped up. This is the one I have at home. That's what it looked like. All the barnacles and everything. Okay. And some more tsunami debris. This is one of their beams, the mortise and tenon. They used to, the old school, they built their houses without using nails or screws. They just put them all together. It would withstand an earthquake, but not a tsunami. Okay. I also have a bunch of them. Now this pile here is an anchor chain. It's from the 15th or 16th century, and there's where this is sitting. I can't tell in this picture, but there's outlines of the ribs of the ship in the sandstone bedrock. The Beachy wrote it out 8 feet down to bedrock, and it was all exposed. And I got the chain and a few other iron pieces, and then 2 days later the whole thing was filled back in again. It hasn't been down to there since. Okay. This is another typical day, bringing it back at the beach, all this stuff here. A lot of tsunami stuff, the big oyster buoys. A lot of these oyster buoys here. Okay. Another day at the beach. This was one day, right here, all this stuff after the tsunami. One day at the beach. All that stuff, but 2 pickup loads. And my property up there, this is how I can get on the beach. Not anymore because the road slid out, but this is one little trip down the beach. Fish box, oyster buoy, buoys. Okay. The sea glass. That's just a gallon Ziploc baggie of sea glass. Took 45 minutes to fill it up at one of the beaches up there. Secret beach. Okay. This hat I found on the beach was in my collection, and this is one of my buddies from high school. We had our 40 reunion 10 years ago, and he come through the museum and he saw that hat hanging there, and he goes, "Bocon," he says, "I worked for them for 11 years. He says, "I probably know the guy that wore that hat." Next, I turned it inside out and it said Rich Clark. He goes, "Yeah, I worked with Rich for 10 years," he says. And he says, "But I haven't been able to get a hold of him." And I said, "Probably fell overboard with the hat." Now this was walking along, and this glass float was right in the seaweed. And the story behind this is, my little brother was with me, and he's really wanting to find a glass ball, so he's keeping ahead of me up in the driftwood. And then there was this big steel buoy out on the beach, and he goes, "That's cool." He went down there to take a picture. I walked 10 more feet and found the glass ball. Boy, was he mad. And there's Hawaii, the one to get away, the big jumbo glass float broke in, they're all busted in pieces. That's how they happen in Hawaii. There's just a lot of rocks, and they just get ground up into sea glass. Unless you get them when they first come in. Okay. This is Third Beach, La Push. This is after the tsunami, but all this styrofoam from floats and stuff been ground up in the driftwood and rocks. That's 2 feet deep of styrofoam back there. You can step down in 2 feet into that stuff. And this is at Shy again. And this is just the top of the high tide line. And this is everywhere now. You just look where the last wave came in, and look at all this confetti plastic. It's just, everything gets ground down into small confetti plastic, and then it goes into microplastics. And here's some more of that styrofoam that was really deep. Okay, more of it. And my take on this here is, people complain about, all the trash in the ocean and all that, and it's terrible and stuff. But my take is once Mother Nature purges that out of her system and throws it on the beach, the animals and the birds aren't going to eat it anymore. But it's an eyesore, but it can be cleaned up. So it's one of the ways, continual ways, that the oceans are cleaning themselves. There's still the great garbage patches out there that are catching a lot of the garbage, but nothing up close of it. Those little pieces are called nurdles. They're what you would find in a beanbag chair. And this is Shy Beach. This is the Boy Scouts. We used to bring them into the lake and hike into the beach. And this is tsunami debris, and they made a raft out of it. And they want to know if they could take it out in the ocean. And I said, well, no, because you don't have life jackets. I said, you got to hike back out 2 miles out to the lake and get your life jackets. And they went over, had a parley, and about 15 minutes later they came back and they had all these buoys tied on them really tight. Said, will this work? And I said, yeah, go ahead. I'm sure they were Coast Guard approved to catch crabs, but they weren't anyways. But it worked. They went out and it floated clear down the other end of the beach. Okay. Oh, back up. So Jack, run the projector here. This is his kid right here. Seth. He's one of the instigators. So I make art out of some of my things. This is one of my paddle fans. I took a bunch of oars that I'd found and made like paddles and oars up here and things hanging down off it. That's in the museum. It's one of my first art objects. Okay. This is my jellyfish. It's a half of an oyster buoy with crab pot buoys and a rope hanging like tentacles from a Jellyfish. Now this is the start of things. My house is like over on this side here. And this was a boat I had. And this was all the trees and my fence up there. And there was a pond there. All the floats were floating in it. And that's how it all started out when I started collecting stuff. And it just, until I built my house and built my towers, it was all just kind of hanging around. Okay. And this is my aunt from Norway. She was here. And I was living in this trailer here. I had a bottle tree and stuff all over. It was kind of the start of things. This is my sign up by the highway. You see that just north of Forks before the 110 La Push Road. This is some shots inside the museum. Go ahead. Got signs, got bottles, just anything you can imagine that's coming on the beach. There's some of my glass floats. Sea glass in the window there. This is my tsunami display, a bunch of tsunami stuff. There's the motorcycle. That's my front yard, my tower. That's the first thing I ever built right there with my beach stuff. It's a monument to beachcombing, and I built that about the time my friend Amos Wood passed away, so it was dedicated to him. Okay. Won't go anymore? No. Okay. Let me put the other one in real quick like here. That's 40 foot. Okay, we'll zoom through these real fast. Here's some of my more recent pictures. There's Jack and me coming up from Third Beach with a load. That's Janice's, I think. Isn't that yours? Yeah, his friend Janice here. One she found and sent to us. And this is 1 week's worth. 2 years ago, another round of tsunami stuff came in. This is me coming off of Third Beach with a barrel and dragging a bunch of buoys. Now this is Shy. We didn't take this buoy home because, boy, you wouldn't be able to pick it up. But I got a great big old stainless steel swivel off of it. It's really cool. This is what it looks like when they're coming in good. There's buoys all up and down the beach there. There's Janice again, showing me her prizes. That's Sand Point. And this is me and Jack this last year. That's the ones we found. Found 5 of them. This is getting one of these buoys off the beach. We built a little arch out of a boat trailer to haul that stuff off the beach. That's on top of one of my newest towers. And this is, go ahead. And this is, where's that, Jack? That's down by Ho Head there. Mosquito Creek. I used to be able to look at a picture and tell you where the beach where it was. But here's a petroglyphs up at Ozette. All the carvings in the rock, ancient carvings. Okay. This is back. This is Yellow Banks. Couple high school buddies and Kenny. The big striped tube back here is a ship-to-shore pipe when they pipe fuel off of a barge or a ship to the shore. Okay. And this is that trip in the boat going back across Lake Ozette. We took the old Coast Guard trail 2 miles into the beach. Okay. There's a bottle I found this year. It's out there in the museum, on the display out there. It's Chinese, and it's a commemorative bottle for this family of people right here. Okay. This is my newest tower. There's that buoy I was taking off the beach. I painted it original orange and the letters on it. And these are all oyster buoys from the tsunami on this thing. Okay. And that is a sunset in the, I don't know, smoke or fog or something. It's half full. That's my high school buddy, Cyrus, dragging some buoys out. Okay. Almost a brand new motorcycle helmet found on the beach. And then this is the first of the container spill headgear coming up.
Where is this?
Back up. Headgear for Taekwondo.
Oh, okay. I found something like that on the beach today.
Yeah? Okay. So, a third beach and a real nasty day, I found this waterproof container with an iPhone, Honda key fob, and $2 in it, and a waterproof case. So I got home, and I powered up the phone, and I got in there to the emergency contacts, and I contacted mom, and stepmom. And, of course, stepmom's the only one that replied to me. And I said, I found this phone on the beach. She goes, well, that was her stepdaughter. So she relayed my information, and then she called me up. I said, well, I found this on the beach. So I said, she's lived in Puyallup. And I says, well, my brother lives there, and he's coming back from Thanksgiving. I can send it there if you want to meet up with him and give it back. And she said, oh, yeah, great. Well, she lost it a year and a half before rafting down the Montesano River, and I found it clear up there by La Push. And it still worked. Everything was dry as a bone. I don't know if she still had the Honda car or not, but so I got a picture of her holding it when my brother returned it and stuff. So I'm going to do a story for my bottle message in a bottle thing. But one of our finds of the year was that it was just amazing stories behind things. There's just the best part. Another sunset. Now this is looking down at Toliak. No, this is that right there is Elephant Rock, Tunnel Island, and we're up on the next deal. This is years ago. Look how young I am. Or this is my buddies. But we hiked all the way down there and took a picture looking back towards Raft River. That's Raft River right there. Okay. And here's the old lady with her scarf, shawl, her hair coming down. That's not like that anymore either. And this is a mama deer and two baby, and they're about 200 yards out from the beach at low tide out there. They just walked out there. I followed them out there, took a picture. You just don't get pictures like that very often. There's a nice buck on the beach. This is a typical me, loaded down with buoys, headed down the beach. There's another picture of me right there. This is my older brother, Matt. He don't have much on his back. This is me, Thanksgiving Day, south of Yellowbanks. Found this double binary glass float. I was a volunteer with the Park Service at the time. Being Rocky, found all these in one day down here by the Raft River. It was a nice day. This is the day my brother and me, Rich, and my cousin Foyston, we four-wheeled into Shy with this Jeep, and then we come back out and we went down another road, and we got all this stuff here, nice clear benthosphere and stuff. This is that same day. No, this is a different day. It's my brother Jimmy. This is the stuff we packed out here. Got my hip at the time. We must have crossed the river. This is my old truck, and this is one pack of stuff here. 2 packs probably. It's my brother Artie. I have 5 brothers, so it was always nice to have some. Brother Matt stuff. That's my oldest boy, Patrick. That was his first glass float. It was up in the rocks. He saw it. He took off running. I said, don't pick it up, because the jellyfish were in, and it was covered with really slippery, slimy jellyfish. If you had picked it up, you'd have dropped it. So we got a picture of him. This was when I was volunteering at the park. They did beach cleanups in the remote beaches. We have different groups of people go in and clean up the beaches, and we would put them in the bags in nets, and the helicopter would come along and fly them off. And I would always coordinate a stretch of beach that I had a whole bunch of stuff stashed. So I'd get all this stuff was flown off that day out of my stashes. My boat full and my truck full. That's me and Rich. He's one of my hiking buddies. He passed away a few years ago, and I bought all his glass floats. I have a cage full of them. And this is one day. That's my best day. There's 75. This is my famous dumbbell, giant dumbbell float. That was a really good day. 75 I brought home that day. This is probably the same day. Okay. This is an anchor chain down there that didn't get packed off. In fact, I did get this later when I had a buddy of one of my helicopter buddies flew it off for me. And this I found as part of an old ship, end of a boom on a ship. We're hooked to the mast, and I put it up in these big rocks where it wouldn't get washed away or anything. And I went back later and it was gone. So I don't know if somebody got it at the time, but it was way in a spot that I'd never been before. So I didn't get it, but I got a picture of it. And that's one thing about how I take a camera. At least you'll have a picture. If it's too big to bring home, you'll have a picture of it. And this is rocks. This one spot up there, south of Yellowbanks, the algae grows in spirals on rocks and different patterns on rocks for some weird reason. I don't know why. And there's that big steel ball that my brother went to look at while I found the glass float. And this is the big old turn wheel off of an oil well they were drilling at Second Beach La Push. There's the number 5 channel marker buoy. This one was a real bugger to get off. Not really, because I took it off in the form of a picture. It'd be nice to have it in my yard. This buoy here is in Texas. That's the wife and I. But it had 2 big stainless steel, like, the parking bumpers in a garage or in a parking lot. There were 2 stainless steel ones, one on each side of that. And my buddy had his boat there, and we couldn't get the whole thing, so we took the big stainless. All 2 of us could do to pick them up, put them in his boat. He uses them for parking bumpers at his place in Texas. This is another boat. This is up at Sand Point. This is a bunch of my buddies and I. It's our winter camp out, guys only camp. It's an old beat up boat found. This is the Monk fishing boat. When it washed ashore, it was fully rigged up with this rigging out and just came ashore. The crew said they were sinking and they abandoned ship, and the Coast Guard come and got them, and the thing washed up. Nothing wrong with it. Washed up on shore. And I got a lot of stuff off of that boat. A lot of stuff.
What year was that? About
86 or 87, something like that. Now, this is a gravel barge that washed up at Goodman Creek. It's like the size of a football field inside, and they just hauled gravel with it, and it washed up. We got up on there, and there really wasn't anything to good. But if you anything that comes up to the beach like that, if you tie it off to the shore and you stay with it, it's yours. But this is in the park, then you were liable for getting it off of there. So that people came back and they brought boats and tugs and helicopters and new lines, and they pulled it off at high tide. This is a crane barge at Ruby Beach down by Claylock that washed ashore. We got some nice stuff off of that one. When they turned this thing loose, they cut all the tow chains They come to a single triangular package and 3 big 50-ton shackles. They cut it all loose and put new ones on and pulled it off. And we went down here, the torch, and cut it up in pieces and packed all that stuff off. Okay. And this is down here. This is my youngest. When we come down for the fair one year, this was just down towards the jetty there, washed up on the beach. It just washed up on the beach. See the helicopter pad? Okay. This was my greatest find ever on the beach. A $500,000 safe boat. This is the ones like the Coast Guard and the Fish and Wildlife and Border Patrol run around with, two 240-horse motors on the back. Brand new, washed off a container ship headed for Chile. Our Homeland Security money bought that 4 of those for them. And it washed up here, and I tried to get my brother to bring the cat and the trailer down and load it out. And he didn't believe me, so he drove down there. Well, the next morning, the Coast Guard had claimed it. $500,000 boat. Missed out on it. I got it in a picture, though. And this, I would make a stash on the beach of these steel buoys, or Russian buoys. I'd make a stash, I'd roll them up in the driftwood, and then I'd go down in with my buddies or my dad's fishing boat, and I'd bring my canoe in with the outriggers, and I'd go into the beach and get them and come back out, and everybody on the boat would be fishing while eating for me. Extreme beachcombing. This is my buddy Mike from Texas. He just passed away this last year. Good beachcombing buddy from Texas. Gonna really miss him. He came out here to go beachcombing, and I took him down to the beach, and there was nothing coming in. And lo and behold, this drops off about 15 feet down to the sand here. It's all gravel up here. And here's this glass float with a barnacle. I've never found one with a barnacle before. My buddy comes from Texas, finds his first glass float with a barnacle on it. Just kind of blew me away. Running a little late here. So this is another one looking in the driftwood. Go ahead, Jack. This is Christmas Day at Shy Shy one year. Gotta get pictures like that. Go ahead. This is always a group picture, Labor Day picture. Playing rodeo with the waves here. Out in the tide pools. Flying up to Vancouver Island, beachcombing. Did that twice with my buddy with his plane, filled his plane up with glass floats. This is, I rode my bike into Shy Shy and I crashed and I raspberried there, my chin, my lip up here. I was in bad shape. My jaw was dislocated. This is my buddy Mike coming up. See, in Texas, it's all flat white sand beaches like out here. He wasn't used to this. And this is up on top where that a couple other buddies there. I got to go over the overlands. There's some of this foam. Go ahead, Jack. This is at the fair, in the early days of the fair, one of my displays. This is the 4th of July parade in Forks. I covered my Toyota pickup with buoys, and I walked in front of it with a pack a load of buoys, and I was giving glass floats out to the tourists, the non-locals, who were all staying in their motel room because it was just pouring down rain. I gave like 5 floats away. This was my yard before I built my tower, all the stuff I had strung up on the fences. This is a glass jug, a friend of mine, a ceramic jug he found this year. Go ahead. We're going to whip through. Here's the gal that had the phone. I returned to her. That's it. Okay. Anyways, family, fun, friends, you know, make it count when you go to the beach. And if it's somewhere you haven't been or it's extreme, make sure you got a buddy and you're prepared. I always take a flashlight. I had to come out in the dark a couple times, and that was not fun. Any questions?
Hey, John, thanks for coming out again. This was awesome. Have you ever, are all your glass floats like the greenish color, or have you ever found any different colors like they have out here on display?
Oh, I have all colors.
You found all colors?
Yeah. I don't, in my museum, I don't sell any of the glass floats that I found, which drives the collectors crazy because there's a lot of them they want. But I have bought some from some friends and other people, and those are the ones I sell that are there. But
What different colors have you found?
if you look at the table out here with the little collection of the little ones on it, that's a kind of an array of colors right there, but I have more than that too. So,
Thank you.
well, thank you all You come up and see the museum, 2 hours north in Forks.
I gotta get up there.
Okay, I'm John Shaw. I'm the Executive Director of the Westport South Beach Historical Society. We're over here from the South Beach. One of the things that people bring in during Dash for Trash quite often are little yellow ropes. People want to know what they are all about. You'll find a little segment of yellow rope with a little knot in it, and what these are is segments of oyster suspended culture. There's a mother oyster that has been living there and growing in a clump while set in the water. And when they're harvested, they come apart by the industry as they process the oysters. A few years ago, the industry was brought in, and between the beachcombers and the industry, they've really knocked this problem down. But people are always curious what they are. And we still find quite a few of them, but the industry is working hard to get them out of the process stream. So when you find a piece of this on the beach, that is a piece of aquaculture. That's been part of growing oysters.
Shotgun shells. We brought the blocks in, but I'm going to mention something about
Yeah, those
the
are
strap.
the wood blocks.
Wood blocks.
Yeah.
Kurt would have kept the shells, but that's all garbage.
So you got enough yellow rope.
Yeah, pick there's the
See,
yellow.
that's the mother oyster.
That's what
That's a
I-
double set.
Alright.
Pacific Seafoods. We'll talk about that in a minute. More yellow rope.
Let's scoot this out of here and put
Where did you hit?
that.
Straight out?
They were Damon Point.
You were Damon Point as well? Okay, excellent. Yeah. We've had a lot of the foam this season, a lot of foam and foreign water bottles.
You want me to throw that or something?
No, that's staying here, the guy picked it up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there was a lot of that home.
A lot of foam this season down here. Okay, see the nice one.
Nice.
That's the holder for that. That's the sheath.
Museum cool.
Museum cool. Now see these are becoming ubiquitous, but that's crab bait straps. So those are lost by the crabbers during the season. We get a lot of them.
There's a lost soul.
He's been waiting to say that. Hat liner. Good job on the phone.
Got to get a handle on things,
Get it.
man.
John's done this before.
Oh, there's a
Pot, or what do you call it?
individual. Oh, that's pot one.
Yeah, pot one. Another masky.
Another mask. Most popular thing. The mask. Oh,
Dog ball. Dog and a dog shoe toy.
on a spacer too.
Spacer?
Yeah.
Campers.
Okay.
I actually know what that is.
This.
Toxic waste.
Yeah.
That's a kid's candy called toxic waste.
Oh,
my
Mondo Liner.
That's awesome.
Wendy found that.
That's nice. That's nice. Excellent. We've never found that before.
You know what? These chew cans.
Yeah.
I always open them now. About $20 in one time.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, that was you told me, so I always look in there.
Yeah. I found that.
Okay. Excellent.